welcome to Scrap and Coffee. So I'm continuing with the I Am mini album, and in this video I will be making the cover and I will be making the binding system or hinge, and for the first time ever I'm going to try and do that from Tyvek. So for the cover we are going to need 3 pieces of cardstock that we are going to combine together. I've already cut them to size in height, so that was for this album 8 3/4, and you need 2 pieces that are so 8 3/4 by 12 inches, and then one that's 8 3/4 by 6 inches, and you are going to combine them together. So for that I'm drawing a pencil mark at 1/2 inch on the shorter side on both my 12-inch pieces, and I'm going to place some double-sided tape in between the cut edge and that pencil mark. I'm using 3/8 of an inch tape here. You can also use 1/2 inch tape, wet glue, whatever you prefer to use. So when I've done that on both pieces, I can remove the tape backing of the first one, and I'm just carefully going to line them up, lining up the bottom and the top edge, and using my pencil mark as a guideline. And if you're not completely perfect welder, that's not a big deal. So this you will repeat with the shorter piece of 6 inch that you will piece together with this end. So once we've done that, you are going to place your chipboard, and I was figuring out the best way to do it without having my overlappings too close to the edges of one chipboard piece. So I found that it was best to place your 6 inch piece on your left and start placing your chipboard pieces from there. And then I still had a little issue because where I'm holding my finger on the bottom, that's where my overlapping is, so you don't want it there. You want to be about 1 inch from one of your chipboard edges. So I've decided to start 2 inches from my left edge, and then I will be fine. So in order to place everything straight, I'm going to draw some pencil lines for me as a guideline. That's something that I prefer to do. It helps me, it makes placing chipboard pieces on my cardstock really easy for me. So here I'm making a little tick mark 2 inches in, and then I'm using my T-ruler to make a straight line from that pencil mark. And then later on, when I'm done placing my chipboard pieces, I will cut 1 inch away from that edge. So please keep in mind when you're placing all your chipboard pieces on where your overlappings of the cardstock are, and make sure that they are at least 1 inch away from one of the edges of the chipboard pieces. So now I'm drawing a line 1 inch from the bottom. You can also make a score line. That's something that a lot of people do. That can be very helpful because I'm going to score in a later stadium, so then you would have done one side already, so that it can be really easy to do as well. Or just use your ruler to bump it up or eyeball it, however you feel comfortable. And then we have 5 chipboard pieces for our cover, and they are all a little bit different in size, so please keep your sizes in mind. The first piece is 6 3/4 by 6 5/8 of an inch. I always like to place a lot of double-sided tape on the back of my chipboard pieces, give it a good coverage, but again, just do it however you want to do it. You can use wet glue for this, you can use a lot less double-sided tape for this, or whatever you prefer. So because the measurements are really close together, I'm just checking myself if I write it down in the right direction before I place it down. So your 6 3/4 is always your height. And then I'm using my pencil marks to place that first piece on there and give that a good burnish. And then in order to determine the space that I want to have between my chipboard pieces, I'm using some double-sided tape. This tape is about 3/16 of an inch, and for me that's the perfect size for my spacing in between my chipboard pieces. Now I buy this at Walmart and it's sold as 1/8 of an inch tape. I've said it many times before, but just for the people that haven't heard me or haven't seen me before. But if you don't have it, you can use 1/4 of an inch tape. And if you don't want to use tape, you can make a little pencil line 1/4 of an inch from your chipboard edge. There are several tools you can use for this, and again you can also eyeball it. So then the second piece measures 2 7/8 in width by that 6 3/4, and we are repeating the same process here, removing the tape backing, and then I am using my pencil mark on the bottom and that spacing tape to place this piece as straight as I can get it. And then again we place some tape in between. And I always like to give the tape a little burnish so it's easier for me to remove the tape backing. Then we're on to our third piece. That's the large piece that measures 6 3/4 by 6 3/4. So it's square. You will not be able to go wrong on that one. And then you repeat every step, and then the fourth piece is the 3-inch piece. And the fifth piece is your 4-inch piece. So that's the order in where you're going to place them on your cardstock. So in between every single chipboard piece you want to have that spacing of 3/16 to 1/4 of an inch. Most people like to go for 1/4 of an inch. That's the most used, what I see in my environment at least. So, and then you see that we have quite a lot of cardstock left, and I'm going to cut it away. I want to have 1 inch from my chipboard, so I will do that on both sides, and then I will have 1 inch around all the cardstock pieces. So I'm just using my ruler here to draw a line from 1 inch from that edge of the chipboard, and it's pretty handy if you get your pencil out. And I'm doing the same thing right here because we started 2 inch from the edge, so I want to bring that back to 1 inch. And then I just use my paper trimmer to cut it away. You can use your scissors for this, you can use a ruler and a knife, or just a knife. Again, if it's not completely perfect, that's not the end of the world, but that's just me. I like everything to be straight and neat, but there's no need to go there. It will also work if it's a little wonky. So now I'm going to use a miter tool. I've made this tool myself from chipboard, really easy, and I'm going to place it on the corners of my chipboard and draw a line, and that will be my guideline on where I want to cut my corners after I've placed my tape. And I like to do it now. You can also cut it directly, but now I know where I can start placing my tape without throwing a lot of it in the garbage. So you want to have about 1/8 of an inch space of cardstock on the edges of your chipboard, so you can wrap them nicely. No naked corners. So I'm going to place some double-sided tape on the perimeter of my cardstock. And for that I like to use 3/8 inch of a tape. You can use 1/2 inch tape, you can just use wet glue, you can place a large 1 inch strip of double-sided tape. Again, go with what you have and what works for you. And then what I like to do is place some double-sided tape on the edges of my chipboard. So for that, first I have to remove the tape backing of our spacing tape. And yes, there are times where I have forgotten this, so please do it now. And I always save these little tape backings, because if I'm not able to finish my cover at once, I can place them back and prevent from dust and other stuff sticking onto my tape. So for this I like to use 1/4 inch tape, but again, just use whatever you have or whatever you prefer. And what I like to do when I place my tape on the chipboard, I like to place it in the little gussets, the spacings that we have between our chipboard. So I use this tool with a pretty thin and sharp edge to really push that double-sided tape in that gusset. And I just feel that it helps with after you've done wrapping your chipboard, it doesn't you always have to work your cardstock a little bit in order to close it nicely, and I think when you place your tape just all the way across, that doesn't help the closing of your cover. So these are just the little details that can help in that sort of things. So you do this on all 4 edges, if you want to do it like this, of course. And then I always give the tape a little burnish. And now I'm going to cut my corners on the pencil mark that we made earlier. So I'm going to use that pencil mark. I've used it to start and ending where I can place my tape on the cardstock, and then I can use it as a guideline on where I'm going to cut my corner away. So I'm going to do that on all 4 sides, but you can also do this with a knife. I always prefer to do it with the scissors, but I want to show you that there are more than one ways to do it. But I was doing this in a completely wrong angle for me, so I wasn't able to get that cut nicely done. So turn it around, and that's the position where I should have done it in the first place, but that's fine. So that's also a possibility. So you do that on all 4 corners. And now I'm going to score around the chipboard with a scoring tool, just to prevent the cracking of your cardstock. Every little step can help in preventing your cardstock to crack. Now this is a good quality cardstock, so I never had any issues with it before. If you have enough spacing in between your chipboard pieces and you just take your time with it, it should be fine with this cardstock, but I just like to make sure that everything is okay. And then after I've done the scoring all the way around, I'm going to pre-fold by lifting up the chipboard onto my workspace. So just push it over the edge. And then I'm going to also do that on the shorter side, since it's a little bit weird in frame because it's a pretty high piece. But there we go. And then the final thing that I like to do is combine a little bit of wet glue, and I place my wet glue really actually against the edge of the chipboard. And again, that just gives me a nice result at the end of the folding, of the wrapping. So I am going to start by removing the tape backing. I always like to do the longer sides first. It's just something that I prefer. And it doesn't really matter if you want to do the shorter sides first, but I prefer to do, if you do one long side, you do the other long side and then the 2 other sides. So all your corners will look the same. So let's get my wet glue ready to go. And now I'm just placing, and you don't need a lot, just a little tiny bit, and I'm just placing it up against the edge of the chipboard. And then I'm going to get my bone folder in, and I'm going to start folding over that cardstock. I'm just trying to push it up against the chipboard right here, and I was getting pretty annoyed with the fact that my piece was longer than my work surface, so I'm going to remove my cutting mat in a second. There we go, and yeah, it's fine. And there we go, now we can work. So I'm rubbing it up against the chipboard, and then I'm holding it. I'm not pulling on it, I'm just holding it down and try to fold it over with my bone folder. And then from the middle, I'm going to fold it down, stick it down on the chipboard towards the edges. So don't try to go too fast, don't pull on your cardstock, just fold it over and take your time. And you will repeat that on the other long side. I'm not going to show you completely, and then we can go to the shorter side. Here I was trying to show you something, but I was completely out of frame. But you are going to fold in your corners here. So what you actually want to do is just push your bone folder up against the chipboard and fold in your little overlapping. And it's pretty hard to see, I get that. So you're going to do that on both sides. So I just like to use the thinner one to really fold it in, and then use the heavier one to make it nice and flat. And then I can remove the tape backing, and again here I'm going to place some wet glue up against the chipboard. And recently I also started to place a little bit on those edges there. Not too much, just a little bit. And then I'm going to fold it in again. And you really want to fold in those little corners so you can have a nice and straight corner after your wrapping. If you don't do it, you will have little things sticking out, and well, it won't look really nice. And it's just something, sometimes you do a really good job and sometimes you do not such a good job, no matter how often you do it. And my daughter was really curious in what I was doing, and actually she wanted my attention, so I needed to take a break shortly from here. So you see, that's a really nice corner there. So we do the same thing on the other side. Fold in those edges, and then we can have a nice straight corner. And then sometimes I just like to use my bone folder to really make that edge, that corner nice and straight. So I am going to place my tape backings back here, and that's because I'm going to take a little break of recording so I can give some time to my daughter. So this is what I do when I'm not able to complete the cover at once. Okay, so here we are back, and I go to use a thin bone folder to kind of burnish the creases. And I tried to use this one, but it's a little bit too thick to go in between. So that didn't really work. But I'm trying to fold it up against, or push it up to the chipboard edges. And then while I'm doing it, I'm trying to lift up the cover slightly. And you have to repeat it later on after you've placed your hinge. So I'm going to do that for every crease on this cover. And then once we've got both sides started, you can lift that cover up again. And again, don't go too fast to prevent your cardstock from cracking. So once we've done all the creases, we can fold it closed, and then this is the base of our cover. So now we have to cover up the inside, and on one spine we are going to place our hinge, but on the other one, on the between piece number, or actually 3, 4 and 5, we are going to do that with some cardstock. So the measurements for that are in the cutting guide, but you wanted to have at least 1 inch on your sides from your creases. And I'm making it the same height as my pages and my hinge is going to be. So I have 1/4 of an inch from my top and bottom. So I'm going to make a really light pencil mark, you're not even able to see it, to guide me so I can center it from top and bottom. And I believe I've made my piece 5.5 inches wide, but I'm not sure from the top of my head. So again, you want to have these pieces covered in a good amount of double-sided tape or wet glue. So I've just covered it almost completely. And I'm just going to remove the tape backing from this whole piece. And I try to place it as straight as I can. But don't be too hard on yourself with these things. So now what I do is I place it down and I burnish the center part, the spine part, I burnish it down. Then I get that other bone folder again, and then I am going to burnish this piece into the creases. So I'm starting on one side, carefully, I just have my hand under the cover, start burnishing it in, carefully, don't push too hard so you don't rip your cardstock, push it up against your chipboard edges and slightly lift up your cover. And yeah, this is a pretty long cover, so. And then I burnish the side part down. So I really want to give that cardstock the space, the room to go in that crease. So you don't stretch your cardstock too much. So only burnish the center part on your spine, then burnish it into your creases, and then burnish the edge onto your chipboard. So you don't stress out, don't stretch it too much, and you can work the fibers of your cardstock in order to make it fold. And there we go. So on the other spine, we are going to cover it up with our hinge. And that's what we are going to make next, if I'm correct. And for the first time ever, I'm going to try and do that from Tyvek. I've heard several people talking about I make my hinges from Tyvek. I've never tried it before, but I thought let's go for it because actually it sounds pretty smart thing to do. But Tyvek is not the easiest material to work with. You are not able to rip it, so it's pretty strong for a hinge. But scoring it and cutting it can be quite a challenge because it's really slippery. And yeah, you really have to take your time working with this in order to keep it all straight. So the measurements for the hinge are in the cutting guide, and I think it was 6 1/4 by 9 7/8. And I'm going to start scoring at 2 inches, and I really work on the fact that I'm keeping the Tyvek in place with my left hand. Then I'm not going to call every measurement because you can find it in the cutting guide, but I'm making my hinges 1/2 inch. So I'm going to score at 2 inch, 2.5, 3 inches. And then I'm giving it a gusset of 5/8 of an inch. So my next score will be at 3 5/8. And you don't have to push hard on the Tyvek to make your score line. So I'm going over pretty careful and making sure that my piece is lying in place. Going pretty slow with the scoring, where with cardstock I would go boom, boom, boom. Here I really take my time. As you can see, I'm really working on the fact that I'm keeping the Tyvek in place. And then when we've scored everything, let's see how far am I going to go with this, because I'm going out of frame eventually, so I'm not showing you all the way to the end. Okay, so when we've done scoring, I'm going to turn it over to the bumpy side, and that's a white side, so it's a little bit easier to see. So I am going to write it down for you on what we have here, but the pencil didn't work, so I need to get a pen, how do you call it? So you have 1, 2, both 1/2 inch, then and the 1 and the 2 will form your actual hinge for one page. That was my daughter again. And then in between that is a little bit of a larger space, are your gussets, 5/8 of an inch, and you will have 3 of those. I'm going to place some double-sided tape, and you are going to do it on number 1 or on number 2. Now I prefer to do it on the second 1/2 inch, so on the numbers 2, because that's just easier for me, something that I prefer. So I'm going to place some double-sided tape, and I'm using 3/8 of an inch tape for this, making sure you're staying in between your score lines, and you will do that on all your numbers too. So it doesn't matter if you do it from Tyvek or from cardstock, the process will be exactly the same. It was just something that I wanted to try out. And I will say that I really like the end result. The things that are a little bit more difficult are your scoring, your folding, but also placing your pages on there, because it's a little bit more flimsy material. So after we've placed all the double-sided tapes on our number 2, we are going to give that a burnish. And then I always like to fold before I remove my tape backing. So I'm going to fold on the score line in between number 1 and number 2. So in between the number 1 and the 1/2 inch with your tape. So making sure that I'm keeping everything straight and lined up. I'm going to pre-fold that and burnish that score line. And now I will open that back up. Now I'm going to remove my tape backing from that 1/2 inch. And now I know when I fold over my Tyvek that I've already have my folding line there, and I'm going to be straight on my fold when I stick it down. And now we are going to fold back on the score line that we can see from this view. And then you will have your 2 inch and then your gusset. So I'm going to repeat this. I'm going to fold on my score line between number 1 and number 2. Make sure that I have everything straight before I burnish this fold. And also this is just a process that with the Tyvek you just need to take a little bit more of time and care in order to keep it all straight. So again, open that up and then stick number 1 and 2 together. And then fold back again on your score line. And then on the back you will see your 2 inch and then a gusset and a gusset. So you will repeat this for every number 1 and number 2, and then eventually you will have 4 hinges. Burnish that, and then you also have to fold your hinges towards the other side. That's the only score line we have not folded on as of yet. And then also burnish that. Now this process needs a little bit less work than with your cardstock. With your cardstock you really have to burnish, burnish, burnish in order to work the fibers of your cardstock. But with the Tyvek it's really flexible and yeah, really easy, so you don't need that much burnishing. So now I'm going to place my double-sided tape, again 3/8 of an inch tape, on the hinges, and I'm going to do that on both sides of the hinges, and I'm placing it as close as I can get it without overhang on the folded edge. So as close as I can get it to the folded edge. And then when you use the 3/8 of an inch tape on your 1/2 inch hinges, you should have around 1/8 of an inch space from your score line. So you do this on all 4 hinges on both sides. Give that a good burnish. And then what I will do is I'm going to taper my 1/2 inches, and that's something that I do because my hinge has the same height as my pages. So here I'm going to taper inwards, starting from the bottom edge of my tape. So I will have about 1/8 of an inch straight from the score line. And when I place my page on this hinge, it will stop at where I've started my tapering. So it won't go any further than where I've started to taper, and that means that my page will be about 1/8 of an inch from the spine, from your score line actually, and you want that. It helps to make it lay flatter. If you place it all the way to the spine, you won't flip your pages nicely. So now we have to give this hinge a good amount of tape. So I'm going to make sure that I have it as flat as I can get it. And I have this 4-inch roll of double-sided tape that I like to use for these sort of things. But you can also use smaller sizes of double-sided tape. And you can also use wet glue, but just make sure that you really cover it, because this is going to be what holds everything together in your book. So the last part I had to piece in a little bit, so I'm just going to cut it away. And of course I'm not going to throw away this piece, I can use it on something else. So I'm placing that back on my roll. And really check if you don't have any tape overhang, because otherwise you will want to cut it away. Give that a good burnish. And now we can place this hinge in our cover. So this will go on a spine that has the number 2 on it. And again, we have about 1/4 of an inch from top and bottom. So I'm going to make some pencil marks. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to make a pencil mark 1/4 of an inch from the bottom and 1/2 inch inwards from my space between the chipboard pieces. So from the edge of number 2, 1/2 inch, and that will actually be my 2 outside hinges. And I'm going to do the same thing on the top. 1/4 of an inch from the top, I'm making a pencil mark 1/2 inch inwards from my chipboard edge of number 2. So here I show you my 2 outer hinges are going to line up with those pencil marks, and you don't have to be exact, it's just a little guideline. So just try to get it as straight as you can, centered as you can. So I'm going to remove the tape backing, but I'm only going to remove the large part of it. You can remove everything at once if you want. If it wants to come off, that is. And there we go. And what I'm also going to do is, because it's Tyvek and I wasn't 100% sure how well the double-sided tape is going to hold with the Tyvek, I'm combining it with some wet glue just to give it some extra strength, because I just don't want this to come loose. So I left that little piece of double-sided tape on for now, so I'm just focusing on that I'm getting those two outside hinges closest as I can get them to that pencil marks that I've made, and straight and centered from top to bottom. And now I'm pressing down in between my hinges, and then again, just like we did with the other piece, first I'm going to burnish that into that crease. Now your Tyvek is really easy to work with at this stage. It's going where you want it really easy. It's pretty forgiving as well. And now I'm burnishing down that edge. And then we have to remove the tape backing on the other side, but I see that at first I've burnished in between my hinges. Make sure it gets a really good stick. And again, I'm just placing some double-sided glue on top of this. So again, I'm going to make sure that it goes into that crease before I burnish down the edge of the hinge on top of the chipboard. So you can see here that it's hanging loose on that edge, and now I'm burnishing it down. So it has the room, the space to go in that crease without stressing the material. And again, I feel that it helps to close your cover. You will always feel a little bit of tension when you closing your cover in the beginning, and after using it and opening it and closing it and opening it and closing it, it's getting easier and better. But these little things just help with that, I feel. So again, just giving it a good burnish, but I think it was already pretty good on there, but still. So this is our cover. Now, as you will see, I'm placing a pocket on that 4-inch side, but there is a measurement for that in the cutting guide, but I will show you in the project share and tell you a little bit more about it. So thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video. Enjoy the rest of your day.